So this is video reaction one for business law. We had to watch a TED Talk on the pollution of the clothing industry. So I'm going to start out by basically recapping what the speaker was talking about in the video. So she basically started out by saying that we as consumers and people are told about the problems in the environment. We're told about all these problems, but we are never told what to do about them or how to help. So she basically says that we're left feeling kind of, powerless as these corporations just pollute everything. She goes on to say that the apparel industry is actually surprisingly the second most polluting industry in the world. Since she then says that we purchase 3 times as much clothing as we did in the 60s, which is only, 50 years ago. So in that time, people in this generation will purchase 3 times as much clothes than people did in the 60s, which kind of shows the value that clothes represent now. They're cheaper and made made more poorly. This has resulted from trade barriers going down across the world, and it's easier for countries to trade between one another, which led to large companies in the United States to outsource their production to other countries, mainly in the Southeast Asia, which they would outsource for cheap labor over there. This led to the rise of the fast fashion industry, which is just the cheap clothing industry. They'd make clothing. They'd make it so cheap by using cheap labor and cheap materials that they could sell it a lot cheaper than it used to be able to be sold, which led to 90% of clothing that used to be American-made in the 60s, which now today is down to less than 2% of all clothing is American-made, which is a very large drop. This coincided with the drop of 80% drop of apparel manufacturing jobs, which is the outsourcing. All these jobs are now heading overseas. She then kind of changed the topic, and she went into polyester. She said polyester is a polluting plastic that's made from oils and non-renewable resources, and it's found in over half of all clothing nowadays. Polyester is non-biodegradable, so every little piece of polyester that has ever been created is still here on the planet today. So polyester is in basically all the clothing now, and when you wash it, it actually washes out little microfibers of it, which then goes into the drains, which eventually leads to the oceans. So there's just probably billions of little pieces of microplastics floating around in the oceans that fish will eat, and then it gets in the fish, and then eventually we will eat the fish, so we are consuming all these little microfibers of plastic. She also says that polyester is non-breathable, so it's a cheaper product, but it's a lot less quality than, say, cotton or linen. It's also extremely energy intensive to make. So to actually produce polyester, it requires 8 times more energy in the production than goes into producing linen. This leads into the next problem, which is that we get 40% of our clothes from China. And in China, 3/4 of their power grid is actually produced using energy from coal, which is the dirtiest and most polluting material that you can burn to get energy. So to the problem that the apparel industry accounts for 10% of the global carbon footprint, which is a lot for just one industry to make. So the locations of forced labor and child labor match up with the locations of the apparel industry. So China and Vietnam and Korea and all these other countries in Southeast Asia, they're all like big hotspots for forced labor and child labor, and they are also the biggest producers in the apparel industry, which is where most of the cheap labor comes from. The next problem is that 1/6 of all people in the world work in the apparel industry, and 80% of those people in the apparel industry are women, and then 98% of these people do not get a living wage. They don't get a living wage, so you can see how hard it would be for them to work in this their whole life, and they get kind of stuck in this cycle of just being stuck in the industry, I guess. The speaker then switches her topics a little bit to show that these apparel companies will try to claim that they're ethical, and they'll show pictures of their factories and say, "Oh, this isn't a bad place to work, and these people get treated fairly." But the problem with just showing a picture of a factory and claiming that it's ethical is that pictures don't show transparency, so you can't see what's actually going on inside or all the inner workings of the factory and how people are actually treated. You can't see wages and health care from a picture. You can't tell how much the people in the factories are actually making or if they're being treated fairly. The pictures, companies don't, they'll show the picture of a factory, but they won't claim their shadow factories, which are when they'll claim this one factory that they're showing is their main source of production, but they'll actually use a whole bunch of other factories that they won't show, which will be a lot worse looking, and you'd be able to tell that they're not a nice place to work. Pictures will also not show material sustainability, so it doesn't show how the factories are using their materials and how they're what they're doing with them, which then leads to her next point, that the apparel industry is the second most polluter of fresh water, which is caused by them just dumping dyes into fresh water supplies in third world countries where there's no people to control what they do and oversee how they're treating the environment, so they'll just go and dump their waste materials in clean water supplies. So she concludes by talking about what the citizen consumer can do, which she basically says we can vote with our dollars. So the apparel industry only does what they think that we will buy, when what they'll make money on. So if we change how we purchase and our shopping habits, we can change how they what they do. We can force them to switch back to more environmentally safe materials like cotton and linen by just going out and buying those products instead of these cheap polyester clothing. So I did a little research of my own to fact check this, and everything that I found pretty much matched up with what she was saying. So I agree with all her points she made on this. I didn't really find anything that could debate her points. Looks like she did a lot of good research on this. So I agree that this is a problem, and it does hurt our environment. So, yeah. And we, the people, have the power to change this. We just have to change how we live our lives and what we wear.